Today we are going to be recording a workshop experience, and I have here my friend Fab, who is going to be going through the painting with me, and you might hear her asking questions on occasion, but you'll be watching me paint. And this is like the similar workshop to what I taught last fall, and it's basically working with oil paints in a manner that I usually paint. So unlike previous workshops where we've used a stencil, I'm going to have you work in the way that I usually do it, scrubbing in the shapes without using any preliminary drawing. So the first thing I want you to do is do a little assessment. So this is the reference photo. On this side I have a close-up just so it's a little easier on my eyes. But we're going to look at this horse's head. This is our subject for today. And first of all, one of the things to be aware of is the angle. So you've got the angle of the horse's head. So if you look on your canvas where that angle is, that is the angle you're going to be scrubbing the animal's head in. So we're worrying only about the shape of the head. Now, where is this head situated in the canvas? If you look at the center here, right about at her ear, is where the horse starts. And look at the top here. You've got some space above. Got to have room for the ears, so there's some space above, and there's a little bit of space below. And in this method, you'll have lots of time to adjust as you go along. So the first thing you're looking for is angle and placement. And really, drawing is all about angle and placement. And that's how we get our shapes in the right place. So you want to start somewhere near the center. You want to scrub a shape that works at that angle, and it's just kind of triangular. So let's start with burnt sienna. We've got a Robert Simmons Filbert bristle brush here. This is number 2. So that's the angle. So you start about there. I put a mark on. You can see I'm a little too high, so we'll go down here. Have to have space up there. There's got to be room for the ears. Now the chin's going to come about down to here, so if we go, where's that angle? It's about like that. You might be getting a little distortion from the camera, but that's about the angle you're looking at. So you're just getting the first basics. So what we're going to do now is look at where the nose goes. You can see you've got space under the nose and on that side of the nose, so it's going to go about like that. How wide is this going to be? If you look at the shape of a horse's head, the width here is about half of the length. So that will get you scrubbing in a basic shape. Just enough. You don't have to scrub it in completely. You're just scrubbing it in so you can see if you're in the right place. So as you can see, there's no real commitment. You're just putting a shape in. One of the benefits of scrubbing in this way as opposed to drawing is you've got lots of leeway, lots of freedom with it. You're not making a line that has to be perfect. And also, rather than using a stencil or using a projector or using a graph system, you've got chance to put your own feeling and signature in it, and you're not so reliant on the photograph, because photographs distort things. I mean, good heavens, how often do you see a photo you think looks like you? So there's the ear. Where's that ear? It's running about right angle to the head. So let's put, you can see from where we started up here, the ear is sitting right about there at right angle to the head. So let's put a little shape in. So far so good, no big commitments. Now her ear is perking up a little bit more than right angle, so if I do that. So now let's do some refining. We won't worry about the neck yet, because this neck is a little bit skinny. She's got her head turned, so we're going to put our own neck in here anyway. But first of all, we're just going to get some shapes in. So now let's refine. Let's refine the head a little bit. This is where you look and see, am I deep enough here? What does that look like? The shape of the nose. It's got a little bit of a bump under the chin, and then this goes up. So we're just refining, and if you go outside the lines of where it's going to be, don't worry. We're going to be coming back in with a Q-tip and refining. So all we're doing is scrubbing in the main shape. Step back a lot. look at it, see if you like what your horse looks like. So another angle to check is this angle. Look at the bottom of the chin. That's going about like that, underneath. And if you look where we started, down from here, that's where the under the neck goes. So that's just a reminder for ourselves where that's going to end up. So let's scrub it in. You could fill in your whole area. We're just using burnt sienna paint, scrubbing it into the canvas. I'm working on a single primed linen canvas, and you can work on a cotton canvas. If it's a little bit finer grain, it's a bit easier to scrub in, because some of these scrub ins with the rougher canvas, it's going to really make it a little bit difficult to scrub it in. I should have mentioned we're working on a 9x12 canvas. So we're just scrubbing in the main shapes. Now let's say you get way off with this and you're looking at it and it's really, really far off. You still have the option of taking the stencil, the black and white photograph that I printed it out in advance, and I've given you one that you can, a PDF that you can use. And this is an actual size, and you cut out the stencil. And that is how you can check to see where you are. As you can see, I've changed the angle of the head just slightly, which is perfectly fine. If I wanted exact, I could do this, but I don't need to. I like it the way it is. This will give the horse a little different character than the photo, and that's perfectly fine. If I was really adamant that it had to be the exact same angle, I would scrub it up, but I kind of like it this way, so we'll just leave it. So that, if you can, just use that stencil only if you need it, because we're not looking at the photograph as the only way this can be. We're looking at the stencil as a way of saying, gee, I'm really lost and I have no idea what the shape of a horse's head is. So for instance, when I was teaching my workshop with this in mind, I had a bunch of students, and many of them had not painted before. So some of them didn't get this bump at the bottom of the chin right. They just couldn't seem to figure out how it looked. So pulling out the stencil really helped. So now just keep refining. You're scrubbing it in so that it's dark enough that you can see the shape, and it gets rid of all the little white specks that are in there. I'm standing a little bit to the side with this camera, trying not to trip on it, so. So let's just scrub in the main shape, and we could extend the neck out just a little bit so we know where we're going with it. But we won't put too much on the neck because we want to have the freedom to adjust the head position on the neck later. Now this horse has a black nose, black and gray, and her eye is dark around the eye too. So we can dip into our ultramarine blue using the same brush, and we could scrub in that area in black. The ultramarine blue mixes with the burnt sienna and creates a black. We're still working just in main shapes. Where is that eye situated? Compared to the area that we started back here, which is below the mane, we are looking at about 1/3 of the way down the head. So let's measure about 1/3 of the way down the head, and we'll scrub in an eye socket area. And by just scrubbing in the area, you have a chance to see whether you like where it is. If you started doing a whole eye in there, you'd get really careful with it, and you'd be scared that you wouldn't get it in exactly the right place. So let's just put the socket in first. That's about 1/3 of the way down. And we'll refine it later. And Fab is doing excellent with hers here too. So now we'll pull out the Q-tips and we'll start refining. So I use a Q-tip to rub off bits of the paint. Where is this horse a little bit lighter? Well, we've got this ridge down that runs parallel to the front of her face, this ridge. This is the one I'm talking about. And that goes right down here. Not in the middle, but a little further this way. And the nostril, we can wipe that out. Give ourselves some lines that we can work with here. So let's wipe out the nostril shape. And then we'll write, once we've got that, you can wipe out this. Q-tips have one soft side and one hard side. So that comes in handy when you're wiping out a fine area. So all we're doing is checking our placement on everything so far. So we're not dipping the Q-tip in water, we're just wiping it out. Where is this area here? And use lots of Q-tips because they start to get dirty. This cheekbone, that comes about there. And this area up here, the bones on the brow. You can refine that eye a little bit. Just wiping things out as you go. And as you can see, it's not going to look like much yet. This is just the beginning. We're just getting the placement. You want to get all the shapes in the right place before you get too carried away with details. So just keep wiping out areas as you see them. If you happen to get an area that you wiped out too much, let's say I put this over here by mistake, you just scrub it in. Really easy to fix. Anytime you want to add more dark, you just scrub it back in. So there's no real pressure with this because you can scrub the whole thing back in, you can wipe the whole thing off. So there's no real pressure to get it right. And this paint will stay wet for about 2 days for you to play with. So you can rub it off, put it back on, rub it off, put it back on. You can spend 2 whole days refining this drawing part. And until you get the drawing right, it's no use proceeding with the rest of it. So where is the mouth situated? Because sometimes that's a little bit confusing. This dark line of the mouth here, you can see it's not quite halfway. It's a little further down. So that is about there. Just refining. Now, what is the shape of the nostril? She's got her nostril flared just a little bit. The shape that I have is a really relaxed nostril. If I wanted to flare it a little bit more, check the shapes. You've got this is almost a square in here. The nose is almost square. The chin comes off there. This is all just refining. How you doing, Fab?
Pretty good, I think so.
Yes. Yeah, it's good. It's good. So now I'm just going to show you on my drawing here. One of the things to watch is here. See this angle in here? You've got quite a little square shape happening right here. Just looking at this, where the under the mouth meets the jawline. That comes out quite strong. I've got it a little too much, so I'll show you what to do next. Now, you'll take your Q-tip and you'll go around the edges and start refining the edge. If you're just wiping off a little, you can use a regular Q-tip, but if you dampen it a bit instead and use a dampened Q-tip, you can get a nice sharp line. So as you can see, we scrub on some paint, and then we can wipe it off easily. And if we need to, we scrub it back on. Wipe it off again. You can do that dozens of times. And don't forget, step back. Step back and look at your drawing and make sure you've got everything right, because this is the stage before your eye gets so used to looking at it, this is the stage that you want to make those corrections, because when your eye gets used to your drawing, it will tell you that it looks right even if it looks lousy. So you want to make these corrections right at the very start. Let's look at the ear, the light on the ear. It just comes down and it goes below the head, because the ear shape itself is about like that. The back of the ear, even though we don't see it in this shadow, the ear comes way back here. So I'll use a Q-tip to wipe out the shape of the ear, just dampen slightly. And the more you paint horses, the more you start to really see where the shapes go. So you can see it's very easy. Your ear size, this part of the ear, from down at the ridge of it to the tip, is going to be about a third. So it's going to be about the same as the eye, and then another third and another third, depending on the angle of the horse's nose. This one is a little bit shorter. Sometimes different breeds will have shorter noses too. They won't be the exact thirds. This is a little horse that was living just down the road from my mom's. And I was home visiting, and my mom said, "Oh, the neighbor's got some pretty horses. Do you want to go take some pictures?" So we went down the road, and they were just standing by the fence. And I have painted this little mare about 4 times. Now she's got quite a dished face. She's got an Arab face to her. You don't have to paint that. You can paint her whatever breed you want. You can give her a Roman nose. You can make a dished face. You can do whatever you want with it. But you can see, compared to a straight line, her little face has got a bit of a hollow in it, in here. She's also got white along the edge, and just to make life easy, we're going to leave that off, because you don't want to start fiddling with a white blaze until later if you do want to put it in there. Okay, let's check some angles. This angle, do you like that one? The angle of her head. Now let's look at the nose. This goes pretty much, if you look at a square, that's how that goes, almost like a square. I find it way easier to draw in angles first, because it's so easy to refine curves afterwards. But if you get the main angles and lines first, then you're cooking. I'm just going to show you Fab's work here. So you can see how hers is coming along. Same thing. All she's got to do now is she's got to, the mane, this is the mane up here. The head curves a little bit back here. It's a little bit hard to see because that's all just mane, but the head curves a little bit back here. So she'll do that, and then she'll refine the ear, and then she'll put more of the neck in there. This, she'll add a little bit of a curve to it, and I'll show you what I mean by the stencil. In case you feel like you're a little bit lost, there's the stencil. So you can see there's a slight difference, but most of the difference here that she needs to work on is going to come when she starts refining the jaw. Other than that, she's really quite accurate with it. And really, if she left it this way, it just looks a little bit more like a different breed of horse than the Arab. So you really, there's not a problem with this. It's just that she could curve that down a little and curve this down a little bit and do a little refining in here, because a horse's nose, see how this lip here and this lip pretty well line up? Because if you don't have this lining up with this, that's what's called a parrot lip, which is kind of a conformation flaw, and some horses have it, it's no big deal. But by having it straight so that this is all just one straight line. Makes it a little bit more anatomically correct. So from here you just refine. Refining nostrils, refining shapes. And everybody will work this stage of the drawing at a different pace. Some people will take 1 or 2 days to do it. In some of the workshops I've taught, they'll spend the whole first day doing this refining, and that is a perfectly good way to do it. Get it correct, however long it takes. You don't want to be struggling later with trying to get it correct after you've put it in wrong and started your final painting and then decide you've got an error. So we're just going to take a little bit of a break. I'll pause the camera for a second. We'll be right back. So the next step, we're going to put in some idea of where the neck is going to go. And I don't want you to worry about looking at the photo here because this is skinny. This horse has turned her head. And if you paint this bum back here and the neck turned in this kind of a portrait, it might not read really well. You can do that if you like, but I think it would read a little bit better if we put the neck as just, let's assume this horse is just a side profile. So the neck here comes down and it just goes almost straight down. But there's a little bit of a fold of skin underneath the neck and then straight down. So why don't you just scrub in a neck shape? There's a bit of a curve there and see if you like it. If you put it too straight, it's going to look way too thick. If you put it too thin, you'll see that the neck looks quite, let's say you only had it this thick. That's a little bit thin if this is where you drew the neck. So let's instead give it a bit of a curve. Scrub it in. I would way sooner you had a drawing that wasn't exactly accurate to your photograph, but had some character to it than if you got so that you always had to stick religiously to the photograph. Because your eye will tell you if something's just not quite right too. Once you're used to painting animals, so scrub in the shape of the neck. Demonstrating here, and I got paint all over the top, so I'll take that off. Got lots of leeway. You can always dampen a Q-tip and take off the paint. Of course, some canvases it's going to come off a little easier than others, so don't worry if it's not completely clean. We'll paint the background around it later. It's one of the reasons I like to paint the background later. You use it as refining your canvas. Now the horse's head itself, if you look at the anatomy of a horse, it's going to be coming right like that, but we're going to have a mane here. So we'll just put that in. So the next, you know, you can always keep checking. Check your ears, check your nostril, check the mouth. Is the eye in the right place? It's all about refinement. So I'm working with the Cobra water mixable oils, If you were using regular oil paints, you would of course dampen the Q-tip with a solvent instead of water. But I like the water mixable because of the lack of odor, because of how easy the cleanup is, and other than the fact they clean up with water, they work just like regular oil paints. Okay, next step, we're going to put the mane in. So she's got a mane that comes down and it's kind of a little bit free. This is where you can inject your own personality and what you want. You know, you could make the mane blowing in the wind, coming across this way. You could make it hang straight down. You could make it nice and smooth. She's a little bit disheveled. So I'm just going to wipe some of the area out. We're not going to put a lot of detail in, and we're not going to worry about the eye socket too much, because once we put the eye in, we're not going to want to be painting around the mane. And here the mane comes down a little bit back from the ear. We're putting indications of where we're going to place it more than anything else. I see a slight bit of a reflected light coming in there on the back of the neck, and then it's darker above. So her mane comes up a little bit like that. And step back and see if you like it. This is where you change it at this stage. That's great, that's great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to refine the lights and shadows. Where is it light and where is it shadow? So obviously it's shadow down here. There's a little bit of light coming in right here. This area is light. So that comes below the halfway mark on her nose. This area is shadow. If you haven't got a nice firm dark shadow in there, put that in now. The light and the shadow is what creates your shape. That's why you really don't need as much detail when you're doing a drawing that's got extreme light and shadow, because our eyes see shape by reading light and shadow. So this is all light. This is all light. By rubbing it off gently, I still got a way of taking a little bit more off where it's lighter, as in here. If I wanted a little bit more off, I can do that. Horses have all kinds of shapes and veins. Their bones are right close to the surface. So a lot of the shape of the bone underneath shows. Similar to people that way, and that's why horses and people are some of the most challenging subjects. You don't have a whole lot of hair to cover things up that are in the wrong place. So using my hard side of the Q-tip, I'm going to draw the eyelid in a bit. And underneath the eye. Then you can come back in with the darks. Hear my dog coming into the room as she needs her toenails done, obviously. Just continuing to refine. Always asking yourself, where is the light and where's the shadow? In most cases with a painting, because of the way our eyes see things, we usually look out at a landscape or at an animal, and you're usually looking at the light or the shadow. Your eye doesn't really look at both of them at once. So we usually see the details either in the light or in the shadow. I'll show you some examples of paintings for each. But in this painting, the details are in the light. There's not much detail in the shadow. The shadows can just be put in one value almost. Here's an example of a painting where all of the details are in the shadow area and the light is really quite blown out. And in this next example, all the details are in the light. The shadows are really quite dark, and all the colors and details and shapes are shown in the light more. So just continuing on with the process, at this stage is where you decide, do I like all these shapes? Do I like the shape of the front of the head? Is the eye in the right place? Is the shape of the eye correct? Are all the lights and shadows in the right place? What about the shape of the neck? Do you like the shape you've created for the neck? You can take the neck right down to the edge of your canvas, or you can leave it ending as kind of a vignette shape, or you can decide that later. And underneath here, how does that look? You've got a little bit of a hollow under there, and then the neck comes down, but of course with the photo and her neck being turned, you're having to kind of create a shape. Oh, that's a good reminder, Fab. At this stage, it's not a bad idea to take a photograph of your painting with your phone or a camera. Just take a quick photo, because that will let you know where you are going with it. You'll see the progress you made as you change things. In some cases, you'll see where it would have been better off if you left it the way it was, so you can adjust it back. Somehow you see things a little bit differently with a phone camera than you do with just your naked eye. A little bit of light comes through here with this horse, and that makes all the difference. So as I mentioned, you can spend a whole day doing this stage. Actually, you've got 2 days if you want to take that long because the paint won't dry for quite a while. And once you've got this stage correct, while the paint is still wet, I like to go in with the next layer. In some ways, this is the fun stage because you're just fiddling along, refining as you go. There is no pressure. And if you really like it at this stage, you can just leave it this way. But I'll show you what the next step is for going along and finishing the painting. I'll give you a little peek at Fab's painting here. As you can see, it's coming along really well. So we're both at the same stage. You can always come in and refine a few more details. A little bit, you can make sure that there's enough dark under the mouth here. Fab's got to put a little more dark in there, just under the nose itself, under the part of the nose there. So at some stage of a painting, I always get an urge to put in more details. So once you've got all your refinements made, you can go ahead and start to put the details in, and I always start with the eyes and the nose. Usually the eyes first, but sometimes I'll do the nose first. And once we get into the details, I'm switching to a different brush. This one is a Princeton Umbria. I'm using number 2 most, and it's a 6200F. That's just the brush that I like. It's a really soft brush, so it won't give too much texture, but will still give brush strokes. It's a flat brush. And you can use a slightly stiffer or you can use a softer. You'll find the one that you like the best. I'll dip the brush just slightly into my water-soluble linseed oil, just a touch. And then if you want to use a mall stick to balance, because everything is wet here, you can do that, or you can just paint. And it's just a matter now of putting in the details. So by mixing together burnt umber and burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, I have a really nice black, and I'll put the details in around the eyes. With the medium in there, the paint will just slide on top of the wet layer you've got already, and you can just put as dark an area as you want. So I'm painting around the eyeball, and I'll also put the pupil in. Horses have kind of a kidney-shaped pupil. The lighter colors, the grays around the eyes, will also help with the refinement. But for now, just putting in the darks. You'll see it a little bit more when I put it into the nose. So here is the black into the nose itself. The nostril. And into the darkest area of the mouth, under the chin. So since you've already got the map for yourself, it's just a matter of going in and refining what you've already done. Dark little wrinkles here. I'll put the dark around the nostril. And I see it as quite dark here behind the eye too, so I'll put that in. Picking up a little bit more of the brown as I go along. you start to pick up too much paint from underneath, you need to make sure you go back into the palette. So you just do a few strokes and then go back into the palette. Here I've got black underneath, so it's not picking up much of the brown. And I can switch to the mostly burnt sienna here to put the rest of the shadow in. By letting the paint stroke on quite thinly here, it still ends up with some variation, so it doesn't look like just a flat area. Just a touch into the medium, and then looking for the areas that are darkest in the painting. Stroking in your black mixture. And then gradually letting it pick up some of the brown underneath and dipping a little more into the black, or the brown, I mean, the burnt sienna. Because the burnt sienna and the black are similar in value, you can just use the same brush, dipping back and forth between the two and allowing some variations. Is that working better, Fab? And at any time, you can clean up any area that you've gone over with a Q-tip, just refining an edge if you need to. In this case, I'm not going to go to very much detail at all in the shadow area. Just kind of let the brush strokes create variation, and that's about it. Most of the detail in this painting is going to be in the light. That's not us, that's the dog moaning and groaning. She does that when she sleeps. So first I'm painting the shadow areas, everything that's in shadow. And we don't need to be worrying about painting hairs because our eye doesn't see that way. We only see shapes at this stage because it's a smooth animal. Even if this was something like a dog with a lot of hair on it, we still wouldn't need to worry about painting individual hairs as much as we just get shapes in. Most of the look of texture, as in hairs, would be stated where the light meets the shadow. Since there's not a lot of texture in this horse, we won't be putting much of that in, but we will inject a little extra color where the light meets the shadow, and that gives you opportunity to kind of come up with your own style a little bit more. Fab was just asking me while we were off camera, because she likes to punch up her paintings a little bit more, at what stage would she be doing that? And I said, where the light meets the shadow is a good opportunity because you can often introduce a lot of color into that area. And I'll show you that in a bit. And at this stage, with your shadow done and your lights still looking quite light, you should see all the shapes that you need to with the horse's head. Just putting the shadows along the mane here. Again, mostly dealing with shapes. And you certainly have an opportunity as you get closer to the edge of the neck to just let details disappear. You can direct where the eye goes by putting detail in certain areas and not in others. Time to put the details in the nostrils. So I've switched brushes. I've got another brush, the same kind, but just a fresh one. And I've mixed up a couple of shades of gray. One darker and one a little bit lighter. And I'm starting to put in the areas of light on the nose. When you've got a thin underlayer of oil paints and it's really thin, you can put 1 or 2 layers on top of it. You can't put more than that or you'll end up with mud, and the first layer has to be really thin. And if you ever get to the point where it's starting to get muddy and you're starting to get having trouble managing the amount of paint you've got on your canvas, you're far better to scrape it off and start back into one area than you are to try to work with the mud. And when you're changing colors like this, painting a dark against a light, it's really important to go 1 or 2 strokes, then back to the palette, and then 1 or 2 strokes and back to the palette. And if you find you want to add a little bit of dark, I've got my brush with the dark on it, and I'll go back and do that. Changing brushes keeps you from getting muddy as well. There's a little reflected light under his chin, but I have to be really careful putting that in, that it doesn't end up looking like light instead of shadow. So I've got quite a dark little gray down there that I'm putting that reflected light in with. You're better to leave it out than to put it in too light. So just going around the areas you've already mapped in, putting the grays in. 1 stroke and back to the palette. The brush picks up the paint, so it will just continue to make mud if you don't go back to the palette each time. My studio is really nicely lit with a north window, but it happens to be on a street that seems to be kind of busy today. I'm in a construction area, so there's a lot of vehicles going back and forth. So I've got the grays in on the nose here, and I'll show you now. I wipe the color off the brush and I'm going to switch to a lighter gray. I could keep the same brush, just wipe it a little bit cleaner. Switching to a lighter gray, and I'll put the next little bit on, but it's just a gentle touch, because if you're already dealing with a couple layers of paint, you just got to really gently stroke it on. And if you can't seem to get it light enough, you can always wipe out a little bit paint and put it on a thinner layer. Be applying to a thinner layer. For instance, right there, it seems like it doesn't want to come off the brush, it just lifts. So I'm just going to wipe a little bit of the paint off there and put the light on. Just little strokes that suggest light. Here on the wrinkles, there's just little areas. You have to be careful when you're painting these wrinkles that you don't make it into little lines. They're like little rows, too rigid. You have to make sure that you're making different shapes. It's so easy if you're painting wrinkles or whiskers or tree branches to just get going along and forget about varying the shapes, and then you end up with little soldiers in a row. And now I'll go do the shadows around the eyes. Again, dipping into the paint, touching the medium and then into the paint. And the beauty of this is you can paint along and you can always refine it by coming back to it with the dark, since you've got your dark brush still at the ready. It's hard to get a fine enough line, and you can switch to a really fine brush if you want. Show you what I mean by going back with the dark. You can refine that line. And into my gray again, and I've even lightened the gray more here. So I've mixed up a color for the light areas of my horse. This color is a mixture of burnt sienna, vermilion, permanent yellow light, and white. And that will go in some of the darker areas of the light. And I've mixed up a second color that is lighter, and it's some of the first color with more white and more yellow added. So anytime you're lightening, this is really important, because this is one of the mistakes people often make when they're painting a red or a brown animal. Anytime you're lightening the color, you have to add yellow. You can't just lighten it with white, you have to add yellow. Otherwise it gets looking pink and pasty. So dipping again a clean brush into the darker of the two colors. This will go on anywhere that it's the darkest areas of the light. But before we do too much of that, I'm going to show you where you can inject color. Let's say you want to make this quite a punchy, colorful picture. So wherever the light meets the shadow, I'm going to go in with straight vermilion right out of the tube. So down here, for instance, I'll put some in. I can put some up here. It will be blended in slightly when I bring the other color in, but there's nothing wrong with leaving some straight color for a real pop in there. Anywhere the light meets the shadow, you can get away with putting in color. It's easy to get rid of if there's too much of it, so just put in a little bit of pure color. And you can see if you don't like it, you can diminish it a little bit later. And we'll throw a little bit this into the area where the ears meet, light and shadow. And once I've got that done, I will go in with that medium brown that I've mixed up. I could at this stage do the highlights, or do the details a little bit more in the eyes, but it could also be done at a slightly later stage too. So I'm painting the darkest areas of the light, and I'll come in later with the lighter areas of the light, highlights. And if I feel like it needs a little more color, I can dip it into my vermilion and let the colors kind of blend together. Again, keeping a little bit of medium on my brush to make it flow smoothly. It's easy to get very smooth, soft brush strokes blended later if you want a blended look. But just stroking the paint on now in nice even strokes will keep the colors and values correct. How's it going over there, Fab?
Good. I'm a very quiet student.
It's what?
Very quiet student.
I do have a quiet student. This stage we get concentrating and we forget to talk. Now you can switch to another brush to do the lightest color, or you can wipe this one off carefully and then put a new brush, or use it on the same color, but I've switching brushes here. Going in with the next lightest color. I'm going to pause and do a quick check on Fab here, see how she's doing. Painting behind me. Let me show you here what Fab is doing. She's putting in her medium colors in here, and she had the vermilion put in. Fab's painting is a little more textural, and that's because she's using a slightly different brush and she likes a little more brush strokes to her work. So she's using the same Princeton Umbria, but instead of a 6200 like I'm using, she's using a 6300, which is just slightly stiffer. So I'll continue on with the lights here. I can see as I go that I'm going to have to mix up a lighter color yet. Or perhaps even come in with my gray, because the light on this horse here looks quite gray. But I think I'll mix up a color that's in between the two. Put a bit of this in and then go with a lighter color. Having your color just a little bit lighter than you think it's going to need to be allows it to pick up some of the color underneath it and still stay true. Dipping a little bit into my lightest gray here, because some of these lights seem to be quite gray. The gray also has just a little bit of yellow added to it, so it's got a warmth to it. You don't want it to get too cold in these areas. So as you can see, by having a really good map underneath of your rubbed out color, it's easier to know where you're going with the rest of your painting. And you always have the other paint and brushes that you used before that you can pick up and refine with if you've gone too far with something. It's kind of nice at this stage to let some of the brush strokes show, because you can blend it later if you want, but if you get too blendy at the start, you've got no other choice but to keep blending. Don't forget to step back every once in a while and have a look at your painting from a distance. You want to make sure it's still reading right from a long ways away. Because after all, not everybody is going to look at the painting from up close as you're painting it. So you want to make sure that it reads right from a distance. So by using a fair amount of medium, I can thin my brush strokes down, and you can either use the same square brush you have been using, or you can pick up one of these neat little dagger brushes, same 6300 from Princeton, but it's got a really unique shape, and I like it for putting in some hairs that are the main, but don't put too many, just a few little stray hairs here and there. You can even put it in vermilion first, as long as there's enough yellow in it. I'm actually going to switch back to the square brush to keep myself from getting too fiddly with that. I still like my square brush. It's actually not a square, it's a rectangle. It's called a flat. You just want an indication of a few hairs. You don't want to paint every little stroke in the mane. You're welcome to use this dagger brush if you want to, Fab.
Draw my brush. So you go with the lighter color?
For the mane?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've put a little bit of vermilion at the very start of the mane, right at the top.
Okay.
So just continuing to place the lights and shadows where I see them here. And as I mentioned, if you want it a little more blended, you can certainly do it at this stage. But it's not necessary. It's just whatever the look is that you're going for. Some people just naturally gravitate to more brush strokes, and others seem to like a smoother look. So you just go with whatever seems to be working for you at the time. So the eye can just be left as a dark shape if it reads right, or if you want, you can put more detail into it. That is entirely up to you. You want to make sure that regardless, if you do decide to put more detail in it, you still keep the shapes where they belong and the values where they belong. You don't want to have the eye coming out so bright and light that it stops sitting in its place where it needs to be. The photograph has quite a bit of light hitting the eye, and it's making it look just a little more blown out than I think it really needs to be.
I'm gonna keep my eyes the way I like it.
You like it the way it is, Fab?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of kind.
It is a good eye the way it could just stay the way it is, but I think I'm going to I'll show you, just put a few more details in so you see what the options are. For that, I'm going to use a small brush. Just one of these little synthetic rounds. Dip into the medium and then into the burnt sienna. You don't want to put too much color in there. So start with just putting the burnt sienna in. If that doesn't show up enough, I'll add a little vermilion and see if that reads better. There's some dark paint under there, so it's not going to show much with just the burnt sienna. Put the pupil in. If you want, you can throw in some vermilion for the eyelashes, but don't be painting every little lash. You could just put a little bit of an indication of the eyelashes. It's not making a lot of difference here, the details I'm putting in, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's such a small area. I'm going to put a little bit of a highlight in the eye. You can see in the photo there is one, but don't paint it bright white. Put some blue in it. It's the reflecting of the sky there. And that sort of gives me an indication of how I can put a little more light into the iris there. Always coming back with the black if you need to. At this point, I'm going to start to mix up some background color. Now you've got lots of choices with what you want to do with the background. If you want to go with a monochromatic look, you can use some of the browns that you've already used and just add some white, maybe a little more yellow to them to keep them warm. Or if you want to go with a complementary color, you can do sort of a green, but keep it quite muted. You want your horse to stand out. Or you can make it just sort of a neutral grayish blue if you like. Any of those colors would work. And you can use some of the paints you've already got. That'll keep it harmonious. Add some white to it. I want to keep it fairly light because I don't want it to be the same value as the horse, and I don't want it to be darker than the horse. You want the horse to stand out. You could, if you wanted to, put a dark background, but the shadow areas of the horse would really disappear. So that's kind of a good color. And I usually mix up a couple of shades, either one darker and one a little bit lighter, or mix one a little warmer than the other one, more yellow to it or more of your brownish colors to it. So you've got variation of a couple of different colors, so you're not dealing with one flat background color. This is a good opportunity to use up some of the paint you have mixed up. And this is where you do the final refinements of your edges. And you can use your brush with the paint on it using the soft brushes, a little bit of medium, and use that to help draw your edges. And this is where you can decide if you want a really sharp edge or a softer edge. So in this case, because the horse's chin here, I want it to stand out, I'm using a fairly sharp edge. And I'll show you what I mean by a softer edge as we get around the horse. So I'm just using a smooth, thin layer of paint, drawing up against the horse itself with that soft synthetic brush. This is still the Princeton 6300. Now here, I'm going to soften that edge because I don't want this neck edge to be very sharp and standing out. I want this to stand out. So for here, I can use whatever brush stroke. You see how that stroke just went on? And it's sort of blended as it went. Now I've got paint on my brush. If I stroked again, I would have stripes. So I'm going to wipe the brush off, go back into the paint, and then come over, and I'm just going to leave some of that because I like that soft edge right there. Especially since I'm going to just leave this vignetted. It's up to you whether you paint your neck right to the edge, but I'm thinking I want to use a vignette effect. Either one would look good with this painting. So now I'm coming around here. You can see that there's white right on the edge of the nostril here. I could punch that up after if I want to. But for now, I'm coming right around here. This seems to be almost the color of my horse's nose. So I probably will put that little white stripe on just to make it stand out more. Of course, you don't want the nose to stand out too much. I still want the attention to go up here in this area where the horse's eye is. And if I feel like it's disappearing too much, I'll add some warmth to it. Add some opposite color. You can darken it a little bit if you want it to stand out a bit more. You can get really strong with the color if you feel like it. Because this all is just a bit of an abstract background. So I can play with colors the way I want them to look. My student is very quiet back there.
Yeah. Concentrating.
She's painting. Again, on the top of the neck here, I'm going to paint rather loosely. Just let the paint do its thing. One of the beauty of oil paints, and in some cases the frustrating part, is that it blends as you go, if you want it to. Now the decision becomes, how far do I take this background? And that requires stepping back, having a look, deciding from way back how much of the background you want to to come around the horse and where you want to start and stop. And that's a tough decision to make from up close. In fact, it's even better to just walk away for a while and then come back to it and look and decide. From here, I'll switch to a larger brush of Filbert Bristle again. This one happens to be a different brand, but you could use the same one. It's just the first one that I grabbed when I reached. And in this case, I'm just going to let the background kind of get a life of its own. Put in a few shapes, step back, have a look, put in a few more, just decide where I want to stop. You don't want it even around the horse the whole way. On the other hand, you don't want it all rough. Just some variety. I'm going to have to take a stop and take a look and decide after a period of time what I want this to look like. You could, of course, at this stage really get blendy in certain areas if that's the kind of way you like to paint. You could blend out entirely these bright areas if you wanted smoother. I kind of like the idea of the brush strokes showing. So that is entirely up to you. After a look, I'm just giving it a few little finishing touches. Just kind of working intuitively here with the way I think it should look. And I do think I will put the little bit of white because I think it would make her stand out. The white edge on the face, which is a, in her case, is a blaze that you just barely see. And I will add a little bit of yellow to my white. I just don't want it to be pure white. A little bit of the yellow and the vermilion. Just a tiny touch to warm it up a little bit so it doesn't stand out as really cool. And it'll still look white. It's just a touch. With some medium in it, I should be able to just stroke a little bit along and put the white on that way with my flat brush. And if it doesn't stroke along well enough, I can always wipe it off with a Q-tip and go again. But I'm going to try it, just see if there's enough. Just put a little white. Yeah, Fab, the white is optional. You don't have to put that on there. I just feel like with mine, she's going to fade into the background a little too much if I don't add that white.
I like it, the idea.
You're going to put it on too, Fab?
Yes.
You can borrow one of my finer brushes too if you want, because you've got those stiffer brushes. You might have a hard time getting that really fine line on. And of course, since you've still got your background color and your brown color, if your white line gets too thick, you can make it thinner, refine it more. Here, you can use this brush, Fab. Little touch of white on the edge of the nostril and over here. Just a little bit. And while
while I'm at it, I might just touch up here with a little bit of that light color. Gotta be careful not to do too much up there because it's, oh, that's too much. Okay, I'll take a gray and put it on again just because it, even though it looks really light right there, it just got too light. So I will take this and put the gray back on. And there we go. And probably now, except for the signing of it, this one is done. And sometimes I'll wait until it dries to sign it, just because life is easier that way. I'd probably sign it over here with a dark color. How and where you sign your paintings is quite personal. Some artists will sign it at the top, some at the bottom, some on the right, some on the left. Some people use a color that fades right in. Some people sign it in red. It just becomes personal style and how much you'd like your signature to stand out. I kind of like to keep it subtle, but over the years I've sometimes kept it so subtle that you can't see it, so that's not good either. People do want to know who the artist is. And I think perhaps this little lady's done. Perhaps a little blend right here because it's just one stroke will sometimes blend it enough. Unfortunately, sometimes the easiest way to know when to stop is when you've gone too far. So be careful not to keep fiddling away until you go past where you should have stopped. And if you're questioning it, step back, take a look. Sometimes these paintings will finish themselves while you're gone. How's yours painting, Fab? You done?
It was good.
Okay, let's do a little unveiling of yours as well here. Looks good. As you can see with Fab's painting here, she's worked in a different style, but she's got the same darks and lights, lights and shadows, the similar colors of background. Her style is just a little more brush strokes. Sometimes your personal style will find you and sometimes you will find it, and it will evolve over time too. And I'm fiddling too much if I stay here and paint. So this is going to be called done before I take it a step too far. And there we go.